I gathered evidence of my wife's cheating, humiliated her, and then kicked her out onto the streets. Finally got the closure I needed after a 10.5-year relationship, but I wish I didn't. I met a girl in college while working at a specific office supply store chain back in 2011. It started as an innocent crush between the two of us, then eventually evolved into a bit of fooling around, both on and off work premises. I knew I liked her, and that she liked me, and the chemistry was through the roof between us. I also had my reservations because she was known as the easiest F in the whole job and had sexual encounters with 3 of my CO workers. She came on to me strong, and I knew she was easy and just wanted a chance with her, but then it developed into more. I had been fairly inexperienced sexually at the time, and she was opening up a whole new world to me and was honestly the first girl to ever be that sexually interested in me. I felt like a king because, for the first time in my life, I had a girl who didn't just have feelings for me. She wanted to jump my bones all the time, and would often stroke my ego about how amazing I was in bed, and how I was the best lover she's ever had. On top of that, we were best friends, had everything in common, and had a bond that neither of us had ever experienced before. It was an incredible start. This went on for a while until I finally made things official with her. We continued to fool around inside and outside of work, and things were great until the newness started to slow down at about the 6-month mark of our relationship. I noticed her sexual energy was kind of off. The dirty talk stopped, the enthusiasm subsided, and while her feelings for me were clearly getting stronger, we were saying I love you by then. The sexual chemistry died down a bit. I chalked it up to the fact that couples grow out of the honeymoon phase and start to settle into a sustainable routine. I was in decent shape at the time, treating her well and doing what would be considered necessary as the foundation of good sex and chemistry. We still had sex when we could, but it just wasn't as magical as it had once been due to her declining interest. At the time, we weren't living together, and she would often promise me that if we lived together, things would be different. This is where I began to start chasing the dragon, so to speak. I eventually brought up the issue again to her when I noticed things still weren't improving and told her it was important to me and something I felt I needed to. Not only feel connected with her on a deeper level, but also as a man. It feels good to know you are wanted and needed by your partner, both physically and emotionally. She said it was nothing and essentially that she hadn't noticed a change. She told me things were fine and that she was just growing up. She considered her previous sexual energy as immature and that she isn't the type anymore to be all over a dude like that. We still continued to have sex once a week, sometimes more, but it was never quite the same. Occasionally she would revive some of that old enthusiasm on vacations, or during times when she was particularly horny. In addition to her declining sex life, I started to notice little red flags, which were ultimately ignored in the long run. Like her not being super generous, not being thoughtful as a partner. She had a habit of taking but not giving, and had no interest in doing anything to strengthen our relationship. She became complacent, lazy, combative, disrespectful, secretive, and generally took me for granted. Our first big blowout was over something I saw on her phone under the Whisper app. The Whisper app is essentially a place where you can make anonymous statements out into the ether with no consequences since there is no identifying information. One thing she posted was, "I want to F my professor so badly." Someone replied to her message in a DM and said, "Just do it." She responded with, "I'm trying, huh?" I confronted her about this and almost broke up with her over it, but stupidly decided to forgive her. This started a long trend of finding incriminating evidence in her phone. I should note that she had a rough childhood and had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety. I always took this into consideration but couldn't excuse bad decision-making and overall being a bad girlfriend just because of the diagnosis, especially since I went above and beyond to give her all the love, support, and literally anything else she needed in hopes of her maybe feeling inspired to reciprocate in her own way. I tried everything, spending more money, more dates, massages, foot rubs, home-cooked meals every night, words of affirmation, vacations, sex toys, BDSM, something she mentioned wanting to try and to no avail. She just wasn't digging any of it. Despite all of this, my career was progressing well, my salary was getting bigger, and I started to get serious about the future, marriage, kids, etc., and I decided at around 5 years together to move in. It started out okay, and for a moment felt like we were getting into a groove and that our sex lives were improving. She was more helpful around the house. She eventually stopped complimenting me, only had sex with me if I asked, usually once a week or once she noticed I was being kind of irritable. We became very stagnant, and I was internally miserable knowing that she essentially brought nothing to the table financially. I was the breadwinner, and paying for mostly everything. She didn't work to improve our home life, and she could care less if I was being satisfied, despite having all her needs met and having an incredible support system. I kept trying to do my best and one-upping myself, went on self-improvement journeys, tried to communicate more, and kept giving. She would say she's trying, but it was always in a way that was the least amount of effort and bare minimum, and she would complain that nothing was ever good enough for me, forgetting to do anything for my birthday, no sex on Valentine's Day despite giving her the works. Coming home to her being off of work all week in a dirty house, while the first thing she asked me is, "What's for dinner?" I was becoming exhausted with her and felt like a parent, not a partner. She ignored everything as usual and kept chugging along, thinking my life is this way because I'm not good enough. I need to improve in every way so she can finally see that I'm deserving of love and affection and that I'm worth putting effort into. My self-esteem was nothing at this point, and I eventually decided that the only way to fix this and finally get the girl I fell in love with back was to marry her. Insert facepalm here. I was still holding on to the sporadic moments of affection, the hope of better days, and the fact that if she was everything I needed before, then improving myself and her life could bring her back. In 2019, we finally tied the knot and had a beautiful destination wedding in Jamaica, where I told everyone who ever knew us that she's the one and we will be together forever. This is where our relationship started to take a turn for the even worse. Because our relationship spanned over 10 years, it's hard to put it all here. I'll follow up with a part 2 and explain how the cheating started and how everything eventually led to a nasty divorce. Sorry for the wall of text. Since they paused, let's check in with the community and see what's going on. John77 says, "This story is an absolute train wreck. You start dating a girl because the sex is great, eventually the sex dies down, and she starts being less affectionate, so you move in with her. Then this continues and escalates. And you find evidence of her either cheating or at least wanting to cheat, so you marry her? At a certain point, I have to start taking the blame off of her. She showed you who she really is repeatedly, you just chose not to believe her." Dop replies, "For sure, man, 6 months later I get it now and obviously see what you mean. Young, dumb, insecure, and inexperienced. Trust me, I know. After a certain point, it was my fault for ignoring red flags and pushing forward." The comment speaks the truth. I think if you're wanting to settle down, get married, and have a family, it's important to do that with someone who's going to be loyal to you until the end, not someone who fantasizes about getting with other people and actively entertains it. It's important to know that we can't force people to love us. Thinking marriage and babies are the answer to everything is wrong. How are we supposed to accept love into our lives when we can't even show ourselves the love that we want to receive? On to part 2 and 3. So, after our massive destination wedding and tens of thousands of dollars spent on an elaborate display of love, things didn't immediately decline. They actually improved a little. We spent the next few months in what felt like a mini honeymoon phase as we enjoyed the new title and presented ourselves to our friends and loved ones as the couple that had made it. It felt like we had a fresh start, and while things weren't perfect, I saw her starting to try a little more. She was slightly more affectionate, a little more enthusiastic during sex, helping around the house and with bills a lot more. She eventually decided she wanted to go back to school so that she could make more money and contribute more, and I agreed to take care of the bills while she used the money from her part-time job to pay for her school. It was at this point that the micro-cheating started to pick back up. The micro-cheating 2014, before marriage. She posted a comment on an anonymous app explaining how badly she wanted to F her professor and confessed on said app that she was actively trying to do so. I forgave her. 2015, before marriage, a video was sent to a female ex-girlfriend of hers via email of her masturbating. She claimed to have not sent it and that it was a 6-year-old video despite having been sent the month prior. 2016, before marriage, I joked around with her one day and said via text, "I know what you did, don't try and lie about it either." I knew she watched one of our Netflix shows without me. She then confessed and said she didn't mean anything by it and nothing happened between them. I was obviously shocked and didn't expect any of that to come out. She was hanging out with and flirting with an old friend from high school who clearly had feelings for her. We'll call him Jacob. She claimed nothing happened. I forgave her. 2017, before marriage, I saw a message between her and her group chat friends at work saying how her favorite sexual position is riding. In her personal life, she would tell me she hated riding, and we rarely ever did it in the 10 years we spent together. In 2018, I started noticing that she was a lot more sexually active behind closed doors than she was with me, except for the occasional vacation, and even vacations were hit or miss. She started buying sex toys, noticed she was regularly watching porn, and masturbating more often the moment I would leave the house. I have no issues with this, however, as you can imagine. I was hoping that somehow that would translate into something in our bedroom, and it never did. Despite my best efforts to create a safe space for us to enjoy sex together, for her, sex with me was a chore, a labor of love, something to pacify me and keep me manipulated. If she wanted her needs met, she would rather handle it herself. Even when I offered to be a student, learn her body more, and learn how to please her in the way she needed, she continued to decline my offers and stood her ground, saying, "What you do already is fine, I'm good, I don't need all of that." 2019, 4 months before the wedding, I Noticed her starting to become friendly with coworkers at her new job. This wasn't a problem, but they were a group of immature party girls that were dealing with a lot of situationships according to her stories of them. I would often drop her off and pick her up from work to make things easier for her, so I eventually got to learn a lot about her coworkers. However, there was a particular gentleman at her job that seemed to have a lot of attention from the ladies at work. We will call him Jason. Jason was a good-looking guy on the shorter side, but very fit, muscles and all, and many ladies at the job were willing to be a side chick to him since he had a girlfriend. One day I came across a message to her friend at work explaining to her how hot she thought he was, how she's obsessed with his abs, and how she thinks that Jason is going to get her in trouble with her fiancé one day. I confronted her and took the brunt of the blame for invading her privacy. However, the one time every few months that I would snoop through her phone, there was always something incriminating there. I never enjoyed looking through her phone because I knew I would always find something. We moved past that incident and still got married. In 2020, things started to decline as her mental health started to take a hit from the stressors she had in life. School, work, me, and my constant requests for improvement, and for us to work together to make our lives better. The first thing that got me considering the idea of leaving was our first wedding anniversary. She didn't bother getting me a gift despite me getting a homemade gift for her and treating her to a day full of activities and a nice dinner that night. She apparently decided that my gift was going to be sex, and she laid on the bed and with the most begrudging voice ever said, "Come on, hurry up and get it over with." I declined. The next day, when I confronted her about the lack of a gift and her negative approach towards initiating sex, she got defensive and said, "I forgot, okay? I just didn't think about it, and in regards to the sex, nothing is ever good enough for you. Everything I do is wrong somehow." She began being a little more complacent. And while she was like a best friend to me, she lacked a lot of the characteristics that would make us feel like more than roommates, friends with occasional benefits at best. We always got along when it came to things unrelated to our relationship, but I always felt like I was getting the bare minimum from her and constantly starving for love, affection, and sex. She used this to her advantage often and would attempt to use sex as an apology or get-out-of-jail-free card whenever I brought up an issue to her. Things chugged along, and we continued going through the motions. We went on vacations, activities, adventures, dinners, you name it. And it was still always just a watered-down version of the person I truly knew her to be. She was my best friend, but I started having trouble seeing a happy future with her. In 2021, after marriage, I broke down one day after coming home randomly with my brother, catching her masturbating to a picture of Jason after we hadn't had sex in almost a month. I told her it made me feel unwanted, and it hurt to feel like I'm being deprived because you're focusing your sexual energy on him by yourself. She denied it, said it's not like that, and that she still needs me and what I have to offer, and attempted to be the best version of herself for me for about a week in order to bring me back in. I fell for it. Not too long after this, her mental health took a turn for the worse, and she admitted herself into a psych ward. I came and visited her every day after work for 3.5 weeks straight, sat with her in the mandatory therapy sessions, and even brought her favorite foods and snacks when she didn't like the lunch offered that day. I believed as she overcame her depression and got the correct treatment in therapy that she would be a better person for me, and our relationship would improve as a result. It did not. In 2022, after marriage, this is when everything officially went to crap. I noticed that she was spending a lot more time with our friends, partying and having fun. There was also a trend of being really casually dressed when we went out, but being dressed to impress when she went out with her coworkers. She also developed a new habit of posting overly sexual memes and text posts that were vague but still clearly had nothing to do with me based on our current sex life. I would question her about it when she would reference things she loves in the bedroom in these story posts, and I would ask, "Is that something you enjoy? I can do that for you if you like," and she would just kind of dismiss it, feeling as if I was trying to control what she does on her social media. Not too long after this, I'm cleaning under our bed, and I find a massive dildo, and I mean massive. I told her it made me uncomfortable that she was using it based on her lack of sex life, and she claimed that she has never used it before. I moved on, but as you can imagine, it left me with a very weird, insecure feeling that just never sat right with me. At this point in my life, my career was going well. I had side hustles and passive income streams set up, and had started to become a little more consumed with work, however. Always set aside entire days and weekends for us to spend together doing something she loved, and I would always spoil her and try to take care of her emotional needs the best I can. I got really into NFTs at the time, and during a week-long NFT convention, I spent a lot of time out that week networking and meeting people from the space. I'm not usually that guy. I'm usually home doing something nerdy, and really only went out with my wife and my boys occasionally. However, that week, I was out late almost every day and let her know ahead of time that this was going to be the case and it would only be temporary, even going as far as to invite her to all of the events I was able to get her into, One morning I was out late for the bored ape yacht party and was communicating with her the entire time, giving her my timeline and when I planned to arrive home. I found it odd that she was up until 2 a.m., still texting back when she usually went to sleep early. I went home that night, found her still up, and didn't think much about it. We both eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I noticed she wasn't in bed. She sometimes gets up before me, and I got woken up by the sounds of her Apple Watch buzzing frantically with text messages. I looked over and saw it was from a group message with her CO worker and a number saved as Tim Bumble. I opened up the text and discovered they were speaking with a gentleman named Tim from the dating app Bumble, who looked like a supermodel and sent them multiple pictures proving just how well endowed he was. Both my wife and her CO worker were clearly interested in him, as I was hit with a long string of messages between the three of them planning a threesome for the following weekend. In addition to that, nudes were contributed to the group text by each party member, and there was even a side conversation between my wife and him outside of the group chat where she expressed her personal interest in his member and the things she wanted to do to him. I officially lost my crap, and things didn't just go downhill from there, they went off a freaking cliff. Edit part 3 since it was removed, so after finding a mountain of incriminating evidence against her, I gathered my thoughts and proceeded to confront her with a "Who the FCK is Tim?" She told me that it was her CO worker's friend and that she was putting on an act with them in order to help her TO worker out. Apparently, her CO worker really liked the guy, met him on Bumble, and wanted my wife's help at seducing him into a threesome. The plan was to set up the threesome, my wife would bail at the last minute, and Tim and the CO worker would be together alone to complete the deed. This was the most idiotic thing I ever heard. Obviously, I was frustrated by the betrayal of her being completely inappropriate behind my back. But it was also the fact that she displayed a type of energy towards this stranger in those messages that I had been trying to receive from her for years. She claimed she was incapable, claimed her sex drive wasn't what it used to be, and that dirty talk made her feel uncomfortable. But here she was, contradicting herself in every single way possible. We cooled off for a bit, and I went to a friend's house for 2 days to clear my head and figure out the next steps. We were a week away from going on a 7-day cruise we had planned prior, and now we were trying to figure out what to do about it. She obviously apologized profusely and admitted it. Was dumb to ruin her marriage over helping a friend fuck a stranger. She started the process of trying to temporarily be the world's best wife for the next week, sending me lunch through Uber Eats with love messages, helping out around the house trying to be sweet and affectionate, and offering me sexual favors. One particular night, we had really great, mind-blowing, emotional sex that reminded me of her earlier sex life, and it made me feel like this was the push she needed to get back into that headspace with me again. If this is what she will be like moving forward, then I could possibly move past things and start rebuilding trust again. So I forgave her and tried to move forward, even deciding to take her on the cruise with me. The cruise went all right for the first few days as I tried to keep my mind off things and enjoy the new effort she was putting in, and the person she was trying to be for me, but it kept eating me up inside. Eventually, about 4 days in, I cracked and looked through her phone again to see if there was any evidence I was missing out on. To be honest, I didn't really find much, other than a conversation with said coworker vaguely commenting on the issues of our relationship based on a conversation they must have had prior. Apparently, she felt that there were issues and problems in the relationship leading to this, that she felt comfortable telling her friends and coworkers but never to me. Even when we set time aside for weekly communication sessions, we argued about it and she broke down crying and stayed in the cabin for the rest of the day, frustrated that I will never get over this and nothing she does will ever be good enough to fix it. The rest of the cruise was quiet and awkward as we tried to make the best of the situation, but the vibe just wasn't the same. When we got back, we started to discuss couples therapy and ways for us to build back up the trust and spark in our relationship. She agreed, and I started looking up therapists and asking her to do the same. She dragged her feet and never got around to the task, despite spending hours scrolling on Instagram daily. Eventually, we found therapy we could afford and started doing sessions, but it was pointless since she put zero thought or effort into any of it and treated it all like a chore. Eventually, I snapped one day during our session, frustrated that she wasn't taking it seriously, frustrated that she didn't even help source the therapy for the problem she created, and even decided to post a funny meme that day about being in a threesome and not knowing what to do. Great meme, really funny, just a little too close to home. At this point, she was all out of effort and completely complacent and devoid of all giving a crap. She began doubling down on the partying and hanging out, began talking to Jason more, spending a lot more time portraying herself as a promiscuous woman on social media and denying a lot of my sexual advances. I stopped planning trips with her or anything for the future because of how weird and uncertain things were. We spent a few months in a weird twilight space where we just went with the flow as roommates, not working on the issues at hand and trying to ignore the dying relationship. It was at this point I started noticing her and Jason getting closer. She'd always mentioned that he was a cool dude, and they had similar interests. Smoking weed, gaming, anime, etc. I understood why they were cool, and she would say things like, "He's short, he has a girlfriend, we're just friends, nothing more." And I would accept it since I didn't have proof otherwise. I continued to snoop through her phone and didn't find anything incriminating, other than them walking to the train together after work and smoking weed on their lunch breaks. I told her based on recent events that alone time with him makes me uncomfortable, and I would prefer if she not hang out with him alone outside of work. She agreed and assured me it would stop. A month later, I asked if she was still hanging out with him, despite the picture being sent from him to her of her walking down the street. I don't know the reference behind this picture, and she claimed not to know why he sent it either. She assured me nothing was going on and sent me a screenshot of her text messages with him, which were few and far between over the course of the last few months, essentially saying that they barely communicate. One Sunday morning, she had plans for brunch with her friends, and she was dressed stunningly, of course. I had already felt like she put more effort into her appearance when going out with friends than with me. But I saw she was happy and excited for the day, and I tried to just internalize it. She noticed I was a little off and asked me, "What's going on with you? You seem upset about something." I told her how I felt, and she proceeded to cry, saying, "I always have to find a way to ruin her fun and put her down. It's like you see me being happy about to go have fun and try to take it away from me before I go." That was never the case for me, and I explained that to her, but it fell on deaf ears, and she just left upset. She ignored my texts and calls the rest of the day as I tried to gauge when she was coming back home. My cousin was admitted to the hospital the day before, and I wanted to use the car to see her. She never responded. I ended up falling asleep waiting for her to come home around midnight, only to wake up when she drunkenly stumbled into bed and passed out with all her clothes on from the night before. She refused to answer any of my questions and fell asleep. Me being upset and unable to sleep, I went into the living room to sleep. I noticed something fall out of her jacket pocket and saw it was a throat spray she had apparently purchased that night. It was still in the packaging, and she keeps all of her receipts. I never brought it up to her as I didn't know how to. In the morning, I asked her what happened that night, and she said she got really drunk, was upset with me, and wanted her space. She also told me that she decided to do coke that night for the first time. Neither of us had ever tried it, but her friend really wanted some. So she tried a bump off a random dealer in the middle of the park to test it before purchasing. I freaked out and told her it was idiotic and irresponsible and that she could have died, but she brushed it off and told me, "I'm always mad about something." 2 days later, on Yom Kippur, I went to work to see most people had decided to work from home that day. I wasn't aware that the holiday was that day and thought back to earlier in the morning. My wife was getting ready for school as I was getting ready for work and was prepared to head into class. After realizing that she went to a public college and shouldn't have class that day, I called her to find out where she was. She never answered, and instead texted me telling me she found out there was no class when she got there and was headed back home. It was around 12 p.m. I told her to call me as soon as possible. She took 2 hours to do so, saying she was on the train. I didn't feel comfortable about it, and later at home asked her to promise me she was telling the truth. I noticed that night in her phone that her CO worker texted her, "How did it go?" To which she called her and spoke with her for 20 minutes. The following morning, I noticed her drawer was open, and I saw something familiar, the deep throat spray, and what I thought was the associated receipt. However, this time the throat spray was not in its original packaging and had clearly been used. The receipt next to it was actually for a McDonald's drive-thru order nowhere near our apartment or her school around the time she said she was on the train. I confronted her, and she assured me it wasn't her receipt and that she just tested out the spray. She also tried to convince me that she bought it for me and her to use, despite never telling me this, and purchasing it on a night where she claimed to be mad at me. I asked her about what her KO worker meant by "how did it go," "how did what go," and "what did you guys talk about if there was no school that day?" She dismissed it as her and her CO worker just catching up. A month later, I found myself going through the phone records online, trying to locate a number I had called in the past for tax help, and realized that I was able to see who texts me and who I have texted going back months prior. I couldn't see the content of the texts, but I was able to see who sent what to whom and when. Instantly, I decided to look under her phone records since I was the primary account holder. I noticed that she had been texting a certain number back and forth for months. I went to her phone to try to locate the contact, and lo and behold, it was Jason, thousands of messages between them over the course of 3 months, none of which were reflected in the empty screenshot of her messages with him, meaning she must have been deleting everything as she goes. I was furious and confronted her. Prior to this, she told me she had no one to talk to about her problems, and her world was falling apart because she had no support system like I did with my friends, despite how close she had seemed to get to her KO workers. When I confronted her about Jason, she finally admitted that they had become close, and he was like one of her closest friends, and that they confide in each other about their individual relationships, and that it was platonic otherwise. She eventually also admitted that she had seen him that day on Yom Kippur when she went to school, and that they still hang out outside of work. I was furious. This was the final straw, and I told her, "If you really like him that much, you should be with him." She yelled back, frustrated, saying that she doesn't even like him like that and nothing she said would get me to believe her. She claimed I was being jealous for no reason, and that their friendship doesn't threaten us in any way. I couldn't trust her anymore and didn't believe anything she said, obviously, so I reached out to Jason. I asked Jason if he was fucking my wife, to which he claimed no, he wasn't. They just talk and hang out sometimes. He doesn't keep any records of their messages because he has a girlfriend and doesn't want any drama by saving texts with female coworkers. He claimed he doesn't mess with girls at work as a personal rule and apologized to me, telling me that as a man, "I'm sorry you're going through this." I didn't know what to believe. I thanked him for the honesty and proceeded to tell my wife to leave the apartment for a few days while I packed my stuff. I packed, I cried, I said goodbye to my cats and goodbye to her, and proceeded to go to my father's house after the most traumatic final goodbye I had ever experienced. We were both devastated to see where we currently were, after all we had been through and how far we had come. All I wanted was to go back to better days. But I couldn't stop thinking about the lying, the mistrust, the laziness, and the complete void left in me by being in such a toxic, unsatisfying relationship for so long. I became a shell of myself. Were there really good old days? Or was it all in your head? It seems like she wasn't really invested in the relationship from the beginning, and at the least she was just in it for free sex. Once the passion and desire wore off, it was all very surface level. There was no substance in the relationship. When you met her, she already had a reputation as the easy one at work and pursued people at work. I'm not sure this relationship was meant to last. I'm also sorry you were in it for so long. OP laughs, technically not cheating, but it sure feels like it. My 31 millions x 29 Fahrenheit started getting close to her. Co-worker, and I found out from a conversation with another female co-worker that she was really into his body, found him attractive, and felt like he was going to get her in trouble with her husband. I felt comfortable and told her about this, and she kind of gaslit me into thinking it's nothing. Fast forward a year, and they become even closer. Hanging out after work and during lunch breaks, smoking weed together, and walking home together. I discovered this and told her I'm uncomfortable with it. She says okay and agrees to limit their time together. A month or two later, I asked if she's still spending time with him. She says no and tries to prove it with screenshots of their messages, which were few and far between. A month later, I found out she skipped college classes to hang out with him alone because I checked the phone records and saw that they had been texting a lot more than she let on and was deleting messages and hiding their private hangouts. She slowly started to come clean but swore up and down it was platonic and that he was like a brother to her. They were only discussing the issues in their relationships, and there were no romantic feelings involved. Not too long afterward, in a completely separate conversation, she casually mentioned to me that she is no longer sexually attracted to me and gave no suggestion or insight on how I could work to fix that for her. I couldn't take the lying, gaslighting, and uncertainty. Things were already on the decline, sex life slowed down a lot, lots of emotional neglect, insecurity from micro-cheating invading privacy, and then trying to tell her not to talk with her CO worker who was a threat to our marriage. It wasn't going well. Broken trust from the inappropriate conversations she would have with co-workers and strangers. It was all too much, and I finally decided to move out and end it all with hopes that she would see my value and come back ready to be a good wife. Now, 5 months later, I was doing well in life. New job, new apartment, 30 pounds lost, and a boost of confidence from meeting new women with lots of successful moments. I felt like me again. Then her and I started reconnecting again. We weren't yet divorced, and we missed each other, and both agreed to still be friends with benefits and see where things go. Possibly in the future we would get back together, and I held on to that because of the length of our relationship, 10 years, and the fact that she was my best friend. Things went well at first, and it felt like old times, and there was clear chemistry and familiarity, but she wasn't overly aggressive with her feelings towards me. She basically played the friends with benefits role well, and never let herself get into the sexual moments. It made me feel like she was not really into that part of our current relationship and the friendship was more important. I was just happy either way. About 2 months after we reconnected, she comes over one day, we grab some food, and head back to my place to do the deed. It went well, and afterward we were just hanging out on the bed, chilling, when she fell asleep naked next to me. I went out to the living room since I wasn't tired and played some PS5. I heard her phone go off and realized she left it in the living room. I got super curious and realized my fingerprints still worked for her phone. I snooped around and eventually found a picture of the same CO worker in her phone. But it was a picture of him shirtless in her old apartment only a few weeks ago. I immediately opened up his contact to see he is saved as Daddy Jason. I did a quick skim through and saw all the graphic messages and pictures shared between them and lost my crap. This looks like it had been going on for a long time, but it doesn't look like they started having sex until we split. I took a picture of her naked on my bed from her phone and sent it to him, saying, "You can have her now," then kicked her out of my apartment at 2 a.m. I told her I knew what she did, and we can't speak anymore. I will call you with next steps for the divorce. I then proceeded to draft her the nastiest, most cruel message I could, while also letting her know just how much this devastated me. She never responded. She followed up a week later, obviously condemning me for everything I said. I wasn't proud of saying any of it, and my only purpose was to hurt her just as bad as I was hurt in that moment. It all went over her head. She called me insecure. She said the resentful sex she would give me once every other week was never good enough. The worst was all she had to say regarding what I had discovered was, "I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. I'm struggling to move on with other people now because I'm afraid that I'm not enough, and that if they don't show their interest the way my ex used to show interest in me, now she shows interest in that way to her TO workers, that it will never work. I just want a girl who likes me for me, thinks I'm good enough, and will always choose me, even when we are old and saggy and have been together for decades. I just never thought women like her existed. I thought she was better than that. Did she cheat?" Update: she sent a long apology explaining how sorry she is and that she regrets it. I just asked her one civil question as a response. "I just want to know why you cheated." She said she is sorry and not sure. She says it was probably because she was attracted to him, feeling unhappy, and it was something new and exciting. That's all the closure I needed. She was truthful for once in her life and finally admitted to cheating. It doesn't change anything, but I'm glad the gaslighting and lying has finally ended, and I can finally know where we stand and move on with a clear conscience. Thank you for all the support, everyone. It's going to take a little while, but I will bounce back better than ever from this. Let's see how the community reacts. Informal writing 4 and 34 wants to say yes, she cheated. She also had an emotional affair with him while you two were still together, disrespected you, and talked crap about you a million times to him. She even brought him over to your old home. The fact you even got back with her in the first place confuses the hell out of me. And even when you found the messages of her calling him daddy, she didn't even apologize, she just belittled you instead. Then you say you want a girl who treated you the way she did. You weren't the only one she was treating like that, so it wasn't even special. Another comment from Life Yogurt Closet 98. No one lies about a platonic relationship. You already know she was deleting messages. No one skips college and lies to their spouse just to smoke weed. She's for the streets, and you should have left her butt when you felt confident again, but you still wanted her validation. Well, you made sure the breakup was easy, and you made sure she could move on easily. You should always tell your social circles the circumstances of separating. P.S. She is and was cheating. First off, she cheated on you for the majority of the relationship. Secondly, just because you're friends with benefits doesn't mean there is emotion involved. I'm sorry that you thought that this would lead to reconnecting with her. And the length of the relationship by no means is an indication of the strength of a relationship. You can be together with someone and it still feel like a prison. You just don't have the guts, the will, or the ability to leave. You two technically were together while she was still messing around behind your back. I'm sorry this happened to you, but it also isn't surprising. You even admitted that the agreement was to be friends with benefits, and one of the benefits for her was that she was able to see you and still see him. What are your thoughts on this wild ride? Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. We'd hate for you to miss out. See you next time.